People who grew up rich, but turned out poor. What is your story? It's a pretty short and simple one. My parents are absolutely loaded. My dad was a VP at a major engineering firm, and while they are retired now, they're sitting on about 4 million in the bank and maybe 12 million in investments and stocks and the like. They're also sbabby juicer bags. My mother is an abusive monster who beat the crap out of me growing up, and my father is an alcoholic who couldn't stop her. So after college, I made it clear I don't want their money or anything to do with them. They use money as control. If they're helping pay for something, then they think that gives them broad control over me. So they can go to hell. I've worked for a clean power company my whole adult life, and I've gotten myself to about $60k a year. Of course, the pandemic has temporarily turned my job off, but I'm proud of where I've gotten, even if it's much lower than how I began. I'm in a pretty similar situation. My parents are upper middle/lower upper class. Private schools and art lessons were pretty normal growing up. Unfortunately, they weren't the greatest parents either. Outside of being taken care of, my childhood was pretty traumatic, and my folks made a ton of parenting mistakes raising me that they didn't repeat with my younger sibling. The extended family are flat out douchebags and tie their entire existence to money. Grandparents dangle cash over everybody's heads to get what they want. I told my grandmother once that I didn't care about her cash as long as she'd visit once in a while. We lived 10 minutes away, and she looked at me like I was speaking in tongues. After high school, I was over it. I still talk to my parents and sibling, but otherwise I told the extended family to pound salt. To this day, I'm reluctant to accept money from my parents. They took the hint and don't offer any more, thankfully. Managed to beg, borrow and steal what I could to make it through college with as little debt as possible, but that's about it. Could have gone into the family business, but followed a different career path, and subsequently moved across the state to strike it on my own. Right now I'd say I'm lower middle class. I'm able to support my wife and kid on just my income, but we are by no means well off. We can weather the occasional surprise bill, but that's about it. My sibling is still in the same mindset as the rest of the family and doesn't understand how we ended up so different. My father was in the NFL in the 1980s and early 1990s. We lived quite well during my childhood. Large house on a golf course, 4 cars, private school, etc. But once he retired, it was over almost immediately. Not because he was financially imprudent, but because it was clear he might not ever earn another paycheck in his life at age 33. So we moved away back to Michigan in a nice, if not flashy house, and lived a very average suburban existence within his means. My parents are still together and have no regrets about slowing the spending down post-career. If I had been older and used to that lifestyle as a teenager as opposed to a child, I can imagine I'd have been a freaking brat about the whole ordeal. Your dad did better than literally 2/3 of NFL players. Sure, the really famous ones, Peyton Manning, Jerry Rice, etc., remain wealthy their whole lives, but the majority actually wind up flat broke. They don't save, they get divorced, and their cousins bleed them dry. So good for your mom and dad for being so responsible and disciplined in an environment that isn't known for those qualities. That's not rich to poor, that sounds like rich to middle class, so you guys don't go broke. Your parents did the right thing, good for them. Many other NFL players wind up flat broke within a few years. My cousin's wife grew up in a wealthy family. Her father officiated their wedding. They were old money inherited from a few generations of grandparents ago. After years of traveling the world and just mismanaging their money, it's all gone. Just decades of spending millions adds up. Must be the worst feeling knowing that generations before you left money for the future generations to be comfortable and stable, and you essentially blew all of your family's hard work. Part of the reason I don't want kids or leave my inheritance to family members when I pass. I'm spending every last bit before I go 6 feet under, going out how I wanna go out. Parents quit a good job cause my dad got tired of the daily repeating pattern. It bored him too much to spend his life on it. My dad got tired of the daily repeating pattern. It bored him too much to spend his life on it. That's how we went from lower middle class to homeless. My dad decided he needed a break for a while. He quit his job, disappeared for a year or so, and left us 3 kids, all minors, to fend for ourselves. Our mother had died years before, so we didn't have another parent to rely on. No drugs or alcohol was involved in his decision either. He just stopped being a parent one day. Dad went to jail for housing fraud in 2010. I was in my teens and $10 million were seized. Went from a $800,000 house to homeless in 4 days because our family didn't even know he'd been in court for 2 years. We were really well off in Korea until we moved to America. It seemed like a piece of cake for a family like mine to start life anew with enough financial backings. My father had worked hard for his family. In the first 2 years of our life in America, my parents were scammed by shady Korean immigration lawyers twice. Blew all of their savings and emergency funds. We started from rock bottom again. I remember skipping 2 meals a day so we could have food to go around everyone. I also remember pulling the plug on the refrigerator because what's the ducking point? If there's nothing in it, we don't look back or talk about those times anymore. You could say that again. My wife's family got scammed by shady town immigration lawyers too. From birth to about 8 years of age I lived in Mexico with my parents. My dad was a truck driver in the United States. With the income he was getting, living in Mexico was awesome. We weren't rich. We lived in decent homes and had a decent life. Most of the money went to helping other family, food and going out. But to me, we lived very good. I don't remember my parents ever stressing about anything financial. Last thing I remember before migrating to the US was the Twin Towers. When we came over, living expenses increased. We lived in my uncle's house in the living room for about a year. After that we rented a room from a family in a bad area. I remember I couldn't go out the front entrance of the apartments one morning for school because someone got stabbed. 2 years later we got our first apartment. We had no furniture whatsoever, no appliances. We each had a box of clothes. That night we had our first dinner. It was Chinese takeout, and we were using an ice chest as a table, buckets for chairs. We felt happiness and a relief to finally have a place to call our own. It's a beautiful memory for me. Thanks for reading. My dad was a millionaire. Cheated on my mom. My mom left him. He had a mental breakdown. Lost everything. Still trying to get her back 10 years later. This is a beautiful poem. My dad was a millionaire. Cheated on my mom. She caught him. He tried to convince a judge she was abusive. Lost half his money. Spoiler, she wasn't. Married a woman he thought was wealthy. She was broke too. My face when they catfished each other. Still trying to pay my mom. I have ADHD and not a lot of ambition. So I work a chill job that doesn't pay very much. What were we talking about again? My grandparents were very wealthy, so they bought my parents a house and basically supported my family, even paying for my school tuition. I wasn't aware of this. Because of this my parents were lazy and never really had jobs. They were always at home, and I didn't find any of this unusual. We had extravagant vacations and I remember being given everything I'd ever asked for. But my grandpa died when I was about 10. Grandma following suit soon after, and all his kids started fighting over the money. I'm pretty sure they're still fighting. Anyway, soon half the lights in our house didn't work, our TVs were all broken, and our cars broken down and barely usable. I was wearing the same uniform all throughout high school, and as a teenager I wore nothing but hand-me-downs. My allowance decreased instead of increased year by year. There were no more vacations. But my parents wasted the rest of their savings on appearing rich, buying fancy jewelry and clothes for themselves and crap, racking up credit card debt. Then they'd host parties for friends in expensive restaurants and I'd feel so angry because back home we'd be eating nothing but canned food. It honestly scarred me so much that my only goal is to become financially stable, and I plan to stay employed without ever retiring because I don't want to be like them, jobless and stupid. This was my parents. Received millions after my grandfather died, then blew it. My grandmother supported us for years, then got sick and lost all her money to medical bills. Then we had to listen to that piece of deuce blame the money for the rest of his life and not the fact he was drunk drug addict. Well, not exactly rich, but my family was making a fair sum when I was a kid. Then there were mass layoffs and now we live paycheck to paycheck. It's not that we don't make enough money, it's just that my parents, with all the respect, are financial imbeciles. On the bright side, seeing them as an example of what not to do, I learned everything there is to learn about personal finance and a fair bit about business. On the stupid side, I've repeatedly explained to my parents all the necessary steps for them to get out if their financial problems. But as my mom put it, if I can't spend my money, then what's the point in even working? Like, seriously woman, you can spend your money, but not **CKING all of it. PS. Sorry for the rant, had to get that off my chest. My dad had a stroke, and the complications from that, the medical bills, and my mother becoming his caretaker led us to eventual homelessness over the course of 5 years. This was in the late 90s/early 2000s. By the time I was 18 we had almost no assets because of medical costs. I became a teacher and am now lower middle class and working toward middle class. My wife works for a non-profit which helps people attain financial stability. Similar story. Both from upper middle class professional families, well on our way to a comfortable life. 3 kids and a house. One of our kids became seriously disabled, medical attention every day, and a couple years later, my husband basically had a nervous breakdown and became almost non-functional. I had switched to part-time when our child was diagnosed. Managing his therapies is a full-time job in itself, and have not been able to find full-time work since my husband's breakdown led to him being unable to work. So I work 2 part-time jobs plus a side hustle, do all the housework and childcare, and care for 2 disabled family members. Use the last of our savings to move closer to my family so I can get at least some help, and the job market is better here. With the coronavirus, I'm terrified. I was already struggling to find something full-time. I grew up in a wealthy part of the United States, and everyone I went to school with had wealthy parents. It's amazing how many of these children are now mediocre at best and not high-income earners. There was an assumption that if they simply went to college, graduated, and got a job, they'd be as successful as their parents. When they weren't, they felt the world was unfair and became apathetic. My parents' neighborhood has homes in the $2 to $20 million range, and about 50% of the houses now have adult children in their 50s living with 80-year-old parents. I have a friend in her 50s, who her life plan is to just wait for her inheritance. From various stories I think she'll end up getting in the tens of millions, but for now her apartment looks fit for a recent college grad. She works just hard enough to get by until then, sometimes needing her dad pay her bills. I think a lot of it stems from the assumption they're gonna inherit things from their parents, like their company or wealth or something like that. I have a lot of friends growing up who came from wealth. We lived in a wealthy neighborhood, but didn't try in high school, and ended up going to mediocre universities. There were a few standouts that easily surpassed their parents in terms of work ethic and intelligence, and are on the road to financial success as we speak. We're early mid-20s now, but there were much more that are just doing alright for themselves. To be fair though, the job market young people are entering now is much more competitive than it was for our parents, so there are more factors that contribute to less success compared to your parents. Most of my friends who grew up rich are literally poor now. It's wild. Their parents eventually cut them off after enabling them to be entitled, spoiled, useless in society. The one guy is working construction for $15 an hour for the guy who bought his dad's multi-million-dollar construction company. Wild. Myself and the other normal, middle class kids I grew up with are living comfortably middle class lives. No complaints. Work hard, appreciate what you got, and be a good person and you'll fare well on this earth. Until I was 10, my family seemed to have an ideal life. Beautiful house or houses in a very wealthy beachfront town, expensive cars, summer camps, and everything else a kid could want. My dad was a dentist and my mom was just starting work as real estate broker. She said her money was fun money. Dad paid the bills. But, unbeknownst to us, Dad didn't pay the bills. He was living a double life with our babysitter. They even had their own house. My parents split and weeks later, the bank took our house. My mom and us 3 kids, were out on our asses. My dad has taken whatever was left of the money, not much, and destroyed my mom's credit with bankruptcies and delinquencies she didn't know about. We struggled for many years and had lots of help from family friends. There were many birthdays and holidays with no gifts and lots of pasta for dinner. My mom could stretch $1 pretty well, since she had grown up with not much money. Now, 30 years later, my mom has become successful financially through lots of hard work. My dad is still with my old babysitter. He retired. He was forced to sell his practice because of lots of bad business practices and is now working a minimum wage job and living in near poverty. Karmasa biatch. My dad owned several very successful radio stations, then sold them all for several million, while all the mega media companies were buying them up. We lived very comfortably for a while with a nice house and a vacation home right on the slopes of a major Colorado ski resort. He married a gold digger. Unfortunately, he bought it all with money that relied on tech stocks. Then the com bubble burst. We lost everything. He tried to sue his broker for bad advice, but only won about $200K. He then declared bankruptcy and lost everything again. Our house sold for half of its worth. I have no idea what happened to the vacation home, but I assume something similar. His wife divorced him. My dad, brother, and I all split up to try to make it on our own. He ended up couch surfing with my mom's family while he got a real estate license. He is still paying alimony. My brother and I put ourselves through school and we both have reasonable jobs now and are doing alright. Edit for those asking for details. My mom passed when I was 11. The gold digger was my dad's second wife. Yes, there is a lot of money that was unaccounted for in my story. I was a detached 16 over 17-year-old at the time and wasn't interested in the details. I just know he owed a lot of money to a lot of people and didn't have anything to pay them with. My dad is doing fine now. He got his real estate license, got back on his feet, then the housing market tanked, and he lost it all again. Now he is semi-retired, working as a manager at a storage facility for more hours than he wants, and living off social security in a swanky retirement community. The moral of the story is, if you invest, diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.